Hey everyone. So yeah, I just got done watching the second episode of season 6 of Dark Side of the Ring on Ludvig Borga, aka real name Tony Helm. And if you don't know much about his life, before and after WWE, when he was as Ludvig Borga from 1993 to very early 94, if you don't know much about what happened before and afterwards, then this is a very eye-opening episode for you because basically they did go over how his personal life was before he got into wrestling as a child and everything. His parents both being a piece of what and divorcing when he was only 2, and they highlighted that. They highlighted over the fact that when he got to 14, 15 years old, he decided to move out. He started to walk away from his home and move in with his friend. And they did have several people they talked to. I mean, the talking heads that they got were Jim Ross and Jim Cornette, of course. They got Tatanka, Chris Chavez, who was in WWE around the same time as Ludwig was. They got him. They got several people that he had worked with in the wrestling and political, scene, if you will, political scene. Excuse me. They got a couple of people like that to talk to kind of discuss who this guy was, in and out of the ring. They got his ex-wife Dee Dee. They got his training partner when he was in the Gladiators, the Finland version of American Gladiators. They got her. They got one of his political running mates, not running mates, but friends, if you will, comrades. They talked to his childhood friend, of course, the one he moved in with around 14, 15 years old. But yeah, and they also talked to this other guy who's who's a bilingual, I would assume, because he talked better English than I think he did Finnish, if you will. Because when they talk to those Finnish, they only speak Finnish, I should say. They had to have subtitles, and yeah, one thing about the subtitles is they need to work on, that being Vice and the people behind Dark Side of the Ring. One thing they need to do about the subtitles, make sure they don't go by so quickly. Make sure you have them right there so people can take the time to read them. But then again, that's what DVR is about, right? You can just pause it and then read it and then unpause. So that's what DVR is for. So what are you gonna do? Anyway, they did, like I said, go over his life previously to that. He went over the fact that him and his friend would build up their bodies when they were young, and then go out when they got older and would get into street fights and everything. And he would be called a Viking when he would go out, and he had a Viking tattoo with a helmet and everything, a Viking tattoo helmet, whatever, on his shoulder. So anyway, they went over all that, and they basically talked about how he wanted to get into Hollywood. He wanted to become famous, so he would move from Finland to California, and he would appear cameo-wise in I would assume some commercials. They showed some of the commercials he was in, like Little Caesars, and I think one for Campbell's, something like that. I gotta go back and look. They did show they had cameo appearances in sitcoms and shows and movies, like show-wise, sitcom-wise. He was cameoing in the new WKRP in Cincinnati show, as well as some other appearances. And he basically wanted to make it big in that perspective, but it just didn't work out because of who he was. His personality, his attitude and everything that he developed because of the broken home, the broken family he came from, was pretty much a lot of the anger he had, a lot of the resentment he had because of that was always causing him to get into trouble, because he would basically, well, I think his ex-wife said it best later on in the episode, he was the kind of person that said what people thought out loud. People tell you, keep your thoughts to yourself, keep how you feel to yourself. He was the kind of guy that didn't do that. So yeah, that didn't help him too much. But somebody did, and I think it was the guy they talked to that was bilingual, that talked very good English, but also you can probably tell he talked Finnish. They suggested get into wrestling. you know, to get into wrestling and everything, and he did. And he started off, you know, obviously from a national standpoint with the UWF under Herb Abrams, and then he went to Japan and everything when that kind of didn't work out as well as he would want. And of course, we know about that situation with Herb Abrams and the UWF. So he went to Japan, and that seemed to be going good for him because he was in the ring with big guys like Vader and Norton and so on. And but it was an outside incident with Norton, kind of a bar fight and everything, that got him, you know, pretty much tossed out of Japan. His career in the Japanese wrestling scene came to an end because, again, of his attitude and such. You know, because of the way he was just presenting himself based on what he had gone through personally. So he basically was able to attract the attention of Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon heard his accent, it's like, hey, I can work with this. And that's how Ludvig Borga came about. And, you know, they went over his brief run in WWE. They even asked Tatanka, you know, if, you know, looking back on it now, knowing who this guy really is, does he think, you know, because he did explain that Vince had gone to him and said, hey, we want you to put this guy over, we want you to rub him, or give him the rub and everything, because Tatanka at that time was undefeated for about 2 years, almost 2 years. So it was like, okay, no problem, I can do that. You know, that being Tatanka, you know, that's what he said in this interview pretty much. He said, yeah, I can go and do that. But, you know, looking back in hindsight now, even he agrees it wouldn't, you know, that it was not the best decision had they known, you know, about the guy, what they found out later on and what they know now. You know, it's like if they had known what he was truly about, what he, you know, had tattooed on his ankle, which was the SS tattoo and everything, had they known all this, known what he was about, his beliefs and everything, yeah, probably they wouldn't have gone and given him, you know, Tatanka's undefeated streak. You know, and he even agrees that, man, no, it was not the best decision. And Jim Ross did not hold back. Jim Ross, more so than Jim Cornette, did not hold back on Borga. He did not hold back on this guy, and he just, you know, it was like, we need to find a way to get rid of him. And when he got injured during the house show at MSG against Rick Steiner, they let him go. You know, they let him go from the company, and pretty much that was it for his wrestling career. And of course, he did try out for the UFC. His first and only match apparently, was against Randy Couture, a legend in the UFC, and Randy basically beat him in 90 seconds, even though he said he would never tap. As soon as Randy put that, you know, thing on, that chokehold on him, that pretty much, you know, spelt the end for Tony Howell, for Ludwig. So yeah, that didn't work out, and basically that was the end of his MMA career. And after that, pretty much, you know, his time in the U.S. came to an end because he and his new wife, they had the house raided by the police because he was pretty much accused for trafficking drugs, illegal drugs. Some he even got from Russia. Even his ex-wife Didi was like surprised that he would have this big old box delivered of, you know, drugs from Russia, or drugs that were meant for horses and everything like that. So basically, him and his new wife, they had the house raided, and because he was trafficking this, you know, drugs and illegal drugs and weapons, including an Uzi, they pretty much said, we got to get you out of here. You got to leave. You know, leave the country. You got to be deported. And that's what they did. And when he got back to Finland, basically he was able to, you know, live his dream. He became famous there. But he became famous in a very diversive, controversial manner. I mean, he was still very outspoken, would say the things he would, and everything, much to the chagrin or shock to some people that would interview him or even vote for him, because even though he was able to become a famous name in Finland, you know, making records, you know, getting back into, you know, fighting or sports entertainment, like with the Finnish gladiators and all that, he was still very polarizing. And basically, long story short, it was this polarizing atmosphere that he had with him that got him elected, surprisingly, in a landslide to the parliament in Finland, in Helsinki. You know, because even though he was very controversial, that attracted people. And they gravitated towards it, especially some of the things that he believed in. You know, they were with. But it wasn't until afterwards, of course, that things started to spiral downhill from there. And, you know, being in, you know, that kind of power, you know, really gotten him into a lot of trouble and everything. And again, people that would interview him, they even had one interviewer being shocked, like I was so shocked. They had this like shock expression on their face when he would talk about things and all that. So yeah, his overall attitude did not help him out, and basically this also led to him taking drugs and alcoholism and stuff like that. And it got to a point where the new wife said, "I'm done. I want out of here." And as she's telling him this, he's going and taking drugs, taking pills, swallowing them, drinking some alcohol, and then he's grabbing for a gun, and she's about to leave, and she's fighting him, and then the gun goes off. But nobody's injured. But what happens is, doing this, he swallows his own vomit, and he ends up passing out when she finds him. And when he does come to, he's not the same anymore. He's not the same anymore, and basically he's found guilty over what happened. He is forced to resign, and everything just downward spiraled from there, to the point that one day his friend, who had extra key to Helm's apartment, went to go see him, and the door was locked, so he opened it, but the lock, the sliding lock was, still attached, so he called the police, and then that's when they found Tony Helm pretty much dead, at the end of, by taking his own life, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it was, again, very interesting episode. And if you don't know much about Ludvig Borga and everything, you need to check this out, because again, I will say this: those that they interviewed, they did not hold back on how they felt about him. They said there was something there,